All right, so today we're diving into some pretty heavy stuff, political philosophy and war strategy.
Yeah.
We're going deep on the ideas that may have influenced the Bush administration's decision to invade Iraq.
It's a fascinating subject.
Very controversial.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Our main source is an academic paper called Leo Strauss and the Neocons at War.
Right.
It kind of brings together this unusual mix of philosophy and military strategy, and even media manipulation.
It really does.
The paper explores whether a group of intellectuals, inspired by a German philosopher named Leo Strauss,
Right.
had a real impact on the decision to go to war.
Yeah.
It sounds almost like a conspiracy theory.
I know, right?
Like, could an academic whose work focused on ancient Greek texts really have shaped a modern war?
Well, let's start by looking at a quote from Donald Rumsfeld,
Okay.
Secretary of Defense during the Bush administration.
Yeah.
He once said that strategic truths sometimes need to be defended by a bodyguard of lies.
That's a pretty striking phrase.
It is.
What do you think he meant by that?
It's open to interpretation,
Sure.
but some argue he was referring to the use of deception in warfare.
Okay.
Think back to World War II, for example, when the Allies created a fake invasion force to mislead the Germans
Right.
about the real landing site in Normandy.
Oh, wow. So maybe Rumsfeld was thinking about historical precedents for strategic deception.
Yeah, could be.
But how does that connect to the Iraq War?
Well, the justifications for the war kept shifting.
Okay.
Remember, it started with the claim that Iraq possessed weapons of mass destruction.
Right.
Then there was the alleged link between Saddam Hussein and al-Qaeda, and later the focus shifted to humanitarian intervention.
And the lack of evidence for those claims, especially the WMDs, really fueled public skepticism about the war's true motives.
Oh, absolutely.
Right.
Senator Robert Byrd, a vocal critic of the war, accused the Bush administration of misleading the American people
Wow.
and potentially even committing an impeachable offense
Okay.
by dragging the country into an unnecessary war.
So we've got accusations of deception and manipulation. But how does this bodyguard of lies connect to actual intelligence gathering?
Right.
Was there any evidence of manipulation there?
There were certainly concerns about the way intelligence was being handled.
Okay.
One key issue was the creation of the Office of Special Plans within the Pentagon.
Okay.
This office bypassed traditional intelligence channels and reported directly to the White House,
Interesting.
leading some to worry that they were cherry-picking information to support a predetermined narrative.
It sounds like a recipe for confirmation bias.
It does, doesn't it?
If you're only looking for information that confirms your existing beliefs, you're likely to miss crucial details that might challenge those beliefs.
Exactly.
Right.
And then investigative journalist Seymour Hersh published an article in The New Yorker that really shook things up. He connected this Office of Special Plans and its potential for manipulating information to Leo Strauss,
Okay.
a political philosopher who taught at the University of Chicago.
Wait, so we're connecting a philosophy professor to the intelligence gathering that led to the Iraq War.
Yeah.
How did that work?
To understand that connection, we need to delve into Strauss's ideas, specifically his controversial concept of the noble lie.
Okay, I'm intrigued. What exactly is a noble lie?
Yeah.
And how could it relate to the decision to go to war?
Essentially, Strauss argued that sometimes for the good of society, it's necessary for leaders to withhold truth from the masses,
Really?
or even to promote a belief that they know to be false.
That's a pretty radical idea. Are we
Yeah.
saying that the Bush administration deliberately deceived the public to justify the invasion of Iraq?
It's not quite that simple.
Okay.
But Hersh's article and the link he drew between Strauss's ideas and the Office of Special Plans
Right.
raised serious questions about whether the administration was engaging in a deliberate disinformation campaign.
All right, so we have this intriguing link between a philosopher and a potentially manipulated intelligence process.
Yeah.
But was Strauss actually pulling the strings? Was he the mastermind behind the war?
No, Strauss had passed away decades before the Iraq War.
Okay.
To understand his potential influence, we need to look at his students and followers, particularly a group known as the Neoconservatives.
Okay, so who were these neocons and how did they connect to Leo Strauss? Were they all just sitting around reading philosophy books and plotting to invade Iraq?
It's more nuanced than that.
Okay.
Many key figures in the Bush administration, people like Paul Wolfowitz, Richard Pearl, and William Kristol,
Okay.
had connections to Strauss either directly as his students or through his writings. They formed a network of intellectuals who shared a particular worldview, one that was heavily influenced by Straussian thought.
So it wasn't just a random collection of hawks pushing for war.
No.
They were a group with a shared intellectual framework, a specific way of looking at the world, and America's role in it.
Exactly. But to be fair, there are other factors that contributed to their rise to power as well.
Okay.
Their roots in the Reagan administration and their ties to the Likud party in Israel also played a role.
So it's a complex mix of intellectual influences and political alliances.
Yeah.
But how did Strauss's ideas specifically shape the neocon worldview? What were the core elements of his philosophy that resonated with him?
Well, one key element was Strauss's critique of modern liberalism. He was skeptical of its emphasis on individual rights and its faith in human reason.
So he wasn't exactly a fan of the kind of liberal democracy that America is supposed to represent.
That's right. He believed in the need for a strong state led by an elite who understood the true nature of politics,
Okay.
a nature that he saw as inherently conflictual and often requiring tough decisions.
Interesting.
He also emphasized the importance of religion and nationalism as unifying forces for society.
Okay, I'm starting to see how this could connect to the neocon worldview, their emphasis on American power and their willingness to use military force.
Right.
But were there any dissenting voices? Did everyone buy into this Straussian framework?
Not everyone, no.
Okay.
One of his most prominent critics was a Canadian academic named Shadia Drury. She wrote extensively about Strauss and his influence on the neocons.
What was the basis of her critique? Did she think Strauss's ideas were dangerous or misguided?
Drury argued that Strauss's philosophy, with its focus on a strong state and a ruling elite, was fundamentally incompatible with liberal democracy.
Okay.
She believed that Straussians were more interested in power than in individual rights or democratic principles.
But wasn't the Bush administration and the neocons in particular constantly talking about spreading democracy, especially in the Middle East?
Yeah.
It seems like a contradiction.
That's exactly what Drury pointed out.
Okay.
She saw a deep disconnect between the neocons' rhetoric about freedom and democracy and their actual policies,
Okay.
which often involved military intervention and support for authoritarian regimes.
So she's basically saying they were using democracy as a cover for a different agenda.
Drury argued that the neocons were manipulating public opinion and using force to achieve their goals.
Okay.
Goals that she believed were more about maintaining American hegemony than about promoting genuine democratic values.
It's a pretty serious accusation. How did she connect this back to Strauss's ideas?
Well, as we discussed earlier, Strauss himself saw limitations in modern liberalism and democracy.
Right.
He believed that most people weren't capable of understanding the complexities of politics
Okay.
and needed to be guided by a wiser elite.
I'm starting to see how Drury could interpret that as elitist and anti-democratic.
Yeah.
But isn't it possible that the neocons, even if they were influenced by Strauss, genuinely believed they were doing the right thing?
Of course, it's always difficult to know someone's true motivations.
Sure.
Drury argued that their actions spoke louder than their words. She pointed to things like the administration's disregard for international law, their use of torture, and their manipulation of intelligence to justify the Iraq War.
That whole noble lie concept is pretty unsettling. If those in power believe they have the right to deceive the public, even for what they see as a good cause, where does that leave democracy?
It's a question that political philosophers have grappled with for centuries. The idea of a noble lie raises fundamental issues about the nature of truth,
Right.
the role of leadership,
Yeah.
and the tension between individual autonomy and the needs of the state.
We've gone from a quote about a bodyguard of lies to a complex philosophical debate about the ethics of deception in politics. It's a lot to unpack.
It is, and it's important to remember that there are different interpretations of Strauss's work and different perspectives on the neoconservative movement.
Yeah.
Some argue that Drury oversimplifies things
Okay.
and that reducing the neocons' motivations solely to Straussian influence ignores other factors.
That's a good point. We need to be careful about attributing too much influence to any one thinker or ideology.
Right.
But regardless of how much Strauss directly influenced the neocons, his ideas certainly provide a framework for understanding some of their key beliefs and actions.
Absolutely. Exploring intellectual history like this can help us see connections and patterns that we might otherwise miss. It allows us to delve deeper into the motivations and justifications behind political decisions, even if we don't agree with them.
Okay, so we've talked about the noble lie, the neocons, and Shadia Drury's critique. Where do we go from here? What are some key takeaways from all of this?
I think one of the most important takeaways is that ideas have consequences.
Yeah.
Philosophical concepts that might seem abstract can actually influence the way people see the world and make decisions.
So we can't just dismiss philosophical debates as irrelevant to real life. They can actually shape the course of history.
Precisely. And understanding the history of ideas can give us a richer, more nuanced understanding of current events.
Okay.
It helps us to see beyond the surface and to analyze the deeper forces at play.
This deep dive has certainly made me think about the relationship between philosophy, politics, and power in a new way. I never considered how a philosopher like Strauss could have potentially influenced something as significant as the Iraq War.
It's a reminder that the realm of ideas is not separate from the realm of action. What we believe, what we value, how we understand the world, all of these things shape the decisions we make both individually and collectively.
That makes sense.
Uh,
But what about other elements of Straussian thought? We haven't really talked much about his views on religion and nationalism.
right.
How did those ideas fit into the neocon worldview?
Yeah, you're right. We haven't touched upon Strauss's views on religion and nationalism yet. Those seem particularly relevant,
Yeah.
given the neocons' emphasis on promoting American values and their focus on the threat of Islamic extremism.
Absolutely. Those are key elements of Straussian thought.
Okay.
Strauss believed that religion, while not necessarily literally true, served a vital social function.
Okay.
He saw it as a way to instill moral values and provide a sense of meaning and purpose,
Right.
especially for those who couldn't grasp complex philosophical ideas.
So he saw religion as a kind of social glue, a way to keep society cohesive.
Exactly. He argued that the philosopher kings, those who truly understood the nature of reality,
Right. Might not need religion themselves, but they recognized its importance for maintaining social order.
Okay.
And remember, Strauss believed that the masses needed guidance from a wiser elite.
It sounds a bit paternalistic, doesn't it? Like the elite are taking care of the unwashed masses who can't handle the truth.
There's certainly a tension there between individual autonomy and the perceived need for social control.
Right.
And you can see how this idea of religion as a social tool could be interpreted as manipulative, especially if those in power are using it to promote their own agenda.
That makes sense.
Eh.
And how did Strauss view nationalism?
Strauss believed that a strong national identity was essential for social cohesion and political action.
Okay.
He saw it as a force that could unite people around common goals and inspire them to make sacrifices for the common good.
I can see how that would appeal to the neocons, especially in the wake of 9/11.
Yeah,
They often talked about the need to strengthen American patriotism and national unity.
exactly. They saw the attacks as a wake-up call, a reminder that America needed to reassert its strength and leadership on the world stage.
Okay.
And they framed the war on terror in very nationalistic terms as a battle between good and evil, between freedom and tyranny.
It was a powerful narrative, one that resonated with many Americans. But how did Strauss's views on religion and nationalism connect to their specific foreign policy goals,
Right.
particularly the invasion of Iraq?
Well, you could argue that their emphasis on American exceptionalism, the idea that America had a unique mission to spread freedom and democracy around the world,
Right.
was rooted in a sense of national destiny that resonated with Strauss's ideas about the importance of national purpose.
So they saw America as a kind of shining city on a hill, a beacon of hope for the world.
That's a common theme in American political rhetoric, and it certainly played a role in the neocons' worldview.
Okay.
They believed that America had a moral obligation to promote its values abroad, even if it meant using military force.
But as we've discussed, critics like Shadia Drury argued that their actions often contradicted their rhetoric. She saw their agenda as being more about power and control than about genuine democracy promotion.
It's a complex issue, and there are certainly valid arguments to be made on both sides.
Of course.
But I think this deep dive into Straussian thought has helped us to understand some of the intellectual currents that shaped the neocon worldview and their approach to foreign policy.
It's been a fascinating journey exploring these complex ideas and their potential impact on real-world events. We started with a quote about a bodyguard of lies,
Right.
delved into the world of political philosophy, and ended up questioning the very nature of democracy and the role of religion and nationalism in society.
It's a lot to think about.
It really is.
And hopefully it's left you with a deeper appreciation for the power of ideas and the importance of critical thinking.
It definitely has for me. I'm starting to see connections I never noticed before. And I'm more aware of the different ways in which ideas can be used to justify actions.
That's the goal of these deep dives, to encourage you to think critically and to engage with complex issues in a more informed way.
Well, you've certainly succeeded in that. This has been an incredibly insightful conversation. Before we go, I want to leave our listeners with one final thought. We've been talking about the influence of a philosopher on a group of political leaders.
Right.
But all of us are influenced by ideas, whether we realize it or not.
Absolutely.
The books we read, the conversations we have, the media we consume,
Mm-hmm.
all of these things shape our worldview and inform our choices. So it's worth taking a moment to reflect on the ideas that are shaping your own thinking.
Yeah,
What are the assumptions, the beliefs, the narratives that are guiding your decisions?
that's a great question.
And on that note, I think we'll wrap up this deep dive. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.